Um, if Popper is so good and true, why isn't he more popular? Like, especially among the academia and scientists, philosophers.
Recall that, Popper's earliest work, I think, came out in the 30s, something like that. And he hasn't been around as a thinker for that long, really. How
Yeah.
long, we might consider, did it take for Charles Darwin's ideas to take off in academia? It was somewhat faster than that, I suppose. But Charles Darwin wasn't out there saying that much of the projects that academia takes on are in fact themselves bad for civilization. The way in which people are taught, the indoctrination they go through, the Marxist leftist leanings of certain institutions, all of these might be anti-civilization. So Popper had great critiques of the academy as it was. And if you're a person who has great critiques of the academy, you might not very well be popular among the academy, especially if you are critiquing some of the great heroes of the academy, people like, starting all the way from Plato, but through to, Kant and Hume and a lot of the classical philosophers, all of whom Popper, by the way, said were geniuses of one degree or another. He had great respect for the people that he was standing on the shoulders of, but he also had great criticisms of them. And so in order to understand Popper's worldview, you need to understand all of these other thinkers and the criticisms against them as well that he was speaking about in order to make progress. So why isn't he more popular? Well, he was just an anti-establishment kind of figure, even though he spoke about the importance of tradition and so on and so forth. He was still someone who was saying of other thinkers who are still popular in the academy today that they have severe flaws. And here are those flaws. Here's a better way to understand epistemology. Here's a better way to understand political systems. Here's a better way to understand what science is all about, role of evidence, all of this sort of stuff. So it itself is deep and broad. I think there are a few places that you can probably go around the world in order to learn more about Popper, but it is, again, kind of niche. And so in one sense, at least, it's kind of advantageous to anyone who might be listening, for example, to understand that precisely because Popperian epistemology is not the sort of thing you're going to pick up in a traditional institution, whether it be at school or university or basically anywhere else, but nonetheless, it is more true than any of those versions of philosophy and epistemology that you're going to encounter in the established institutions, that you are at an advantage if you are going to take on these ideas now, because you are getting in still early. In the long run, as David Deutsch likes to point out quite often, everyone is a Popperian in the areas in which they excel. Soon, I don't know how soon, but soon I would expect everyone would understand that simple fact about reality. Everyone's a Popperian in the areas in which they excel. Therefore, Popperian epistemology is more true than any other epistemology that's out there. And then eventually people will come on board and understand this in much the same way that many, many people who perhaps aren't religious understand that Darwinism, or neo-Darwinism, as we speak about today, is the way in which we understand the diversity of species, evolution over time, all that kind of stuff. But we shouldn't expect that any new great idea is going to have necessarily rapid uptake, especially in the areas of philosophy. Most people aren't interested in philosophy, full stop, let alone reading why the most popular philosophers have made a whole bunch of different errors. And Popper is the philosopher that kind of points out the problems with every other philosophy.